Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Real Talks Dominate Real Estate. I'm Charlie Bengel.
And I'm Eyerusalem Meaza. Grab a cup of coffee and let's make your real estate career better.
Happy Hump Day, Eyerusalem. Let's talk about what's in the news today.
Happy Hump Day! Real estate professionals were constantly on the quest to acquire new leads from using third-party platforms that put quality leads into our pipeline to running our own ads on Google, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, or Twitter. We rely on collected consumer behavior in order for those ads to be truly optimized. In fact, the collection of consumer data has become so impactful that oftentimes the consumer feels like the internet knows what they're thinking before they can even begin searching. So, what would happen if suddenly everyone started using private search engines? What if consumer data was no longer collected? What then? How many lead generation businesses would fall apart instantaneously? How effective would your targeted ad campaigns be? Would your platform investments and advertising efforts become completely ineffective? Collectively, real estate professionals and consumers alike care deeply about privacy and protection. However, both groups are also interested in maintaining a strong and thriving economy composed of security, value, and variety. So, what are some solutions that will provide a better level of safeguarding? Can these adjustments be implemented without completely abandoning the search engines that provide personalization and ease of use and power our data-driven success opportunities? We could remember to disable data sync, automatically clear cookies after browsing, disable location tracking, customize privacy settings, and use incognito mode. We've always had the ability to control what we do or don't share with the internet, but the reality is that most of us simply don't take the time to pay attention or simply adjust our settings to match what we're comfortable sharing. It is a fascinating subject, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think opt-in search engine privacy sites will squander real estate advertising efforts moving forward, or if data will remain the preferred free currency to spend. In other news, the pandemic and high unemployment rate haven't slowed the housing market, with homebuyers facing the heightened competition this summer for a limited number of homes for sale. Some have decided to try to gain an edge by waiving contingencies to make their offers more competitive. In June, nearly 20% of successful offers submitted by Redfin real estate professionals in select major U.S. markets reportedly waived the inspection contingency, compared to 13.2% during the same month in 2019. Further, 20.6% of winning offers waived the appraisal contingency, up to 17.4% a year ago. Homebuyers are waiving the contingencies to make their offers more attractive to home sellers. The inspection contingency allows the buyer to cancel a purchase or request repairs during the inspection period. The appraisal contingency allows buyers to cancel a deal or renegotiate the price of the appraisal comes back lower than the specified amount. Both an inspection or appraisal contingency are used in offers to protect home buyers in a transaction. Today's market would remain tipped in favor of sellers, as would be spring buyers are shopping well into what would normally be summer vacation season. Daniel Hagel, Realtor.com's chief economist, said in a recent report on Realtor.com's weekly recovery report. In other news, as the effects of the pandemic continue, 9 in 10 realtors say their housing markets are in recovery mode, with many even saying their markets are hotter now than a year ago. Recent member surveys from the National Association of Realtors show. Jessica Lotz, NAR's Vice President of Demographics and Behavioral Insights, notes several insights culled from recent NAR research that show how buyers and sellers' behavior is changing during the coronavirus health crisis. The following are the changing client behaviors. Buyers are in a rush. Last year, buyers looked at an average of 9 homes before making a home purchase. Now they're looking at 3 to 4 homes before initiating a contract. Wish lists are shifting. Home buyers are changing some of their priorities for home features. For example, NAR research show that the top feature desired by buyers is a home office. Buyers are less concerned about commutes. As remote work grows, 22% of about 2,300 realtors surveyed by NAR say that their buyers are becoming less concerned about commute time when shopping for a home. Next, multi-generational households may continue to grow in common. 1 in 6 Generation Xers and younger baby boomers purchased a multi-generational home pre-COVID. Lotz suggests that the trend could increase as more generations, including aging parents and adult children, all come under the same roof during the pandemic. Moving forward, that could mean your buyers will be looking for larger single-family homes, and they also may want to make sure that they have a sizable living space on the first level of an aging parent. Pets could drive purchase decisions. The pandemic has sparked a surge in households that want a pet. NAR survey have shown that pets can influence when and where people buy. 43% of households say that they'd be willing to move to better accommodate their pet, according to NAR's 2020 Pets in Real Estate study, Animal House Pets in the Home Buying and Selling Process. A first-time buyer wave could emerge. Consumers may show more commitment to their home than to long-term relationships. In the 1980s, 75% of first-time buyers were married. In 2019, that dropped to 53%. Young adults are waiting longer to get married. Meanwhile, unmarried couples are buying homes at the highest levels ever recorded by NAR, 17%. Also, NAR research has seen a rise in roommates pooling their incomes to purchase a home together. Overall, in 2019, first-time buyers comprised 33% of the housing market, still a low number by historical standards. But there could be an uptick, particularly in affordable places further out. If young professionals become less tied to a metro area for work, in metros where it can be difficult to afford a property, they may increase their purchases. Last but not least, housing tenure could fall. Over recent years, homeowners have stayed put in their homes longer than they have in the past, an average of 10 years, which is longer than the traditional 6-year average. Americans are not moving longer distances like they did in the 1980s. As cities urged stay-at-home restrictions during the pandemic, consumers may start to question whether their home fits their current needs. Charlie, what's going on with rates?
So, Eyerusalem, would you move to a nicer house to accommodate your cats?
Lee.
Absolutely, she said. 30-year fixed, 3 and an eighth, 30-year jumbo, 2 and 7/8, FHA and VA, 2 and 3/4. These are purchase rates in the DC metro market, complements of PNC mortgage. Refi rates is not something that we talk about on the show very often, but there are 2.99% conventional refi rates floating around in DC as well. So I think rates continues to be a great conversation to be having with our clients. Back over to you, Eyerusalem, to talk about the market.
Last week in Hampton Roads, we saw 777 new listings hit the market, 804 properties go pending, and 845 properties sold. In the last week in the Washington metro area within 30 miles of the White House, we saw 1,465 new listings hit the market, 1,346 go pending, and 1,580 homes sold. Back over to Charlie with our special guest.
Thanks, Eyerusalem. Before I bring Amy Lassen in, I just wanted to highlight a couple things that you mentioned, Eyerusalem. One, buyers are writing offers after seeing 3 to 4 homes. I hope everybody was listening to that. I hope that that is something that we're sharing with our purchasers to set that expectation before we start showing houses to them, right? What a great topic of conversation to have with them before we take them out. And then another fact that I thought was really good to know, sellers are staying longer, 10 years, right? It used to be shorter. So that was, I thought, an excellent news article that you went over for us. So appreciate that. I'd like to welcome to the show today, Coach Amy Lassen. Amy, it's good to see you. Today we're going to be discussing pricing, CMAs, and why can't I just use a CMA as my listing presentation? Huh. So Eyerusalem the other day was going over a survey that W&H Studios did. They are the owners of Cloud CMA. They asked a bunch of agents, what's in your CMA? And I thought that some of the facts were rather interesting. This is kind of hard to read. Maybe you can, try to zoom in a little bit on that. Thank you. So we're going to get into this a little bit, but let's almost start, Amy, with what is a CMA,
right?
And why is it different than a listing presentation? Because frankly, some of these good CMA programs, they have so many add-ons, you can almost make it into a listing presentation, but I think you and I agree that that's a pretty big shortcut.
Well, I think definitions help. CMA stands for what? comparative market analysis. So if your comparative market analysis has your bio and your testimonials, I don't think that's a comparative market analysis. I think a CMA is normally a subset of all the things we present to the consumer. And I was sharing on Monday that I had been reading the book Influence, and they talk in there about how you can persuade a consumer with price or with the perception of value, or you can be persuasive by making their decision making easier. Right? When you influence the decision, it can be all about price, which is one of the components of having a discussion with the seller. We're either negotiating the price at which we're going to put the house on the market, and we're also negotiating our own price. But the wonderful thing about having a really long programmatic listing process is you lengthen the relationship and you give them more things to work with to make a decision. So having the pre-listing conversation, the pre-listing communication, sending the Google survey, showing up with really good things. By the time it comes to say, so seller, are you interested in getting your house on the market? You can get it listed with you at the commission that you require to provide the type of marketing you do, and priced at market value. And that's the way to do it.
Good. So what should we be including in our CMA?
So we're talking the actual pricing analysis, or are we talking about listing conversation?
I think it's the actual pricing analysis. Now, when they did this survey, they asked, "Do you include your resume?" Right? I would argue, and I think that you would agree, that should be part of the pre-listing packet that goes to the seller, right? So some of this is not necessarily.
I think it's just a disagreement about terms. And I think because this company does this for a living,
right,
to the CMA is the listing package.
Yep.
So I think that's the reason those are in here.
So a couple interesting thoughts on this. And there was another article on Inman about this today. So it's a total of 21% of agents always or often include Zestimates in the CMA report. And there was a guy who is now retired from Zillow, and he wrote an opinion piece today in Inman. His name is Jay Thompson. That name may be familiar to some of you out there. He was with Zillow Group for many years, and he was on the big Facebook groups, kind of defending Zillow, or at least trying to share the facts of Zillow from Zillow's point of view. And he was saying that agents are rather foolish to not be discussing Zestimates, and in markets where there are iBuyers, be discussing iBuyers as well. But the sellers have already probably been on Zillow, and they know what their Zestimate is. And if we don't discuss it, they may bring it up, or they may not, but it's probably still in their head. And I thought it was when we were talking about this earlier, Eyerusalem laughed because he argued that, Jay argued that, it's not a Appraisal, it's a Zestimate. And it's not a substitute for a professional pricing opinion.
Sure.
And Zillow says that on the site.
Right.
So having a conversation around a Zestimate is not that hard, because Zillow says what they are and what they're not. And Zillow will even, if you dig around in Zillow, it'll tell you what their accuracy, what they believe their accuracy rate is for your city.
Sure.
So I think, manning yourself, arming yourself with what is the Zestimate for that property that you're going to be discussing with the seller? How accurate does Zillow think the Zestimate is? And then, knowing the difference between a Zestimate and an appraisal, to have that discussion with the seller, I think just makes good sense if they bring it up. And maybe it makes sense to bring it up anyway. I think his argument is rather interesting, right? Even if they don't bring it up, you do, and say, oh, by the way, right? We also know that Redfin, I think Redfin's data is a little bit better because they're an actual brokerage, right? They have their, Redfin estimates. People are familiar with these things. So we can kind of ignore the elephant in the room, which Redfin is a huge company. They get a huge number of eyeballs on their site, and Zillow is even bigger. So at least having this information in our back pocket, I think, makes sense. How do you feel about just sharing? I don't know that I'd share Redfin because, they're known for, doing things on the cheap. But would you recommend, and we haven't really discussed this, but would you recommend going over the Zestimate with the seller, whether they bring it up or not? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I think it sure does depend on the market. And I'm only saying that because you may be bringing up things that are a distraction. But
Yep.
in general, the quick answer is yeah. I think let's be prepared to show them everything. And let's do it in a pretty quick fashion because we've got a lot to cover,
Yep.
right? So you can say, as you can see, Zillow is putting the Zestimate here at this, and here's what we have here, and here are the tax records, and whatever it is, like lay out all the things and show them you've done your homework. The property that I listed just Friday, the Zestimate was 311. Well, I got 373. So I think going over the Zestimate would have been a waste of her time. It just kind of wasn't even interesting enough to ponder. But yeah, Charlie, I think you're hitting on something pretty foundational, and that is be careful not to go into a listing appointment having your seller know things you don't.
Right.
And this happens where they're like, well, what about George's house across the street? And actually, this happened in the early conversation with this seller. She said to me, the people down the street sold their house for X. And I said, actually, they sold it for Y. And I told her exactly. They listed it at this. They got this offer and they closed at this. And she said, oh, I knew exactly. I had done my homework. And actually, that sounds like I was talking down to her. And hopefully in no way did I do that. I just was really clarifying, no, they didn't quite get that. Although we beat the pants out of that. We did way better than them, and that was that was crazy. So my market is accelerating at such a pace that I'm going to choose the things to present differently than I would in a more balanced market. So Charlie, I think as you and I talk about best practices for CMA, we're going to have some recommendations for always, and then some adaptations.
Yeah. So suggested list price. We have a total of a quarter of people don't always include the suggested list price as part of the presentation. Talk to me about where you are on the comps, that and actually having on paper a suggested list price that you share with the seller. We know that we're trying to get the number from them before the appointment. It's one of the questions that we ask before the appointment, right?
Right.
How much are you looking to get for your home? Some people are evasive and they say, well, it's your job to tell me that, this or that. We all know that everybody has a price in their head. Some people just don't want to share it. I think knowing that ahead of time is really important. But I mean, when I do a CMA report, I have a suggested list price like all the time.
Yeah.
But a quarter of agents, this is why I find this so fascinating. A quarter of agents seldom or never do.
So Charlie, this is so funny to me because you and I talk openly in our shows about our different personality types and how you're an analytical and I'm an expressive. So I will tell you, I know the price, but I don't write it down.
Okay.
Bring in the comps and then I walk them through the comps, and my hope is they're going to come with me on the journey. You know, and it's harder now on Zoom. I haven't figured out how to like circle things on a screen, but normally I'm there with a highlighter and a pen. Right? Look at this one had the walkout. This one
I do the same thing. Yes.
So what you hope is that you come to the conclusion and you say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, where do you think your house? And then they choose the number. So I'm not having to sort of disappoint them with a number and defend myself. I know the number. I don't necessarily sort of commit to it. I hope they will create it organically.
Okay, so let's say the house is worth $350.
Okay.
Right? You go through the comps and it's obvious that it's worth $350.
Yeah.
But the seller says, so when you say, so what do you think? Well, we're just, 400 is our number.
Right.
This is the prettiest house on the block.
Right.
Right? We need this money to buy up.
Right.
Right? Or we paid X a couple of years ago. We need to make sure that we're, getting that back. Right? So that's an objection. How are you handling that when you've shown them the comps, but there's just a disagreement, and the disagreement is a pretty hefty number?
Well, this is a fascinating conversation. It's slightly off of what we intended to cover with
it is.
Punch list. But here's the thing that you have, every single agent listening, here's what you need to consider in that moment. Are you wrong? Because I'm not joking. Every once in a while, the seller will say, what about this?
Yeah.
The agent is actually mistaken. Okay. So you've so got to do your due diligence. You have got to work so hard to do the best that you can to understand. And pricing is not something that every agent is great at. So I'm not saying first thing you do is doubt yourself, but that's one of the things in the mix.
Yeah.
is really make sure you've done your due diligence. The other ways that I handle these types of objections is to just explore deeper, right? The thing in communication is always affirm what has been said and then do some sort of pivot or do some probing, right? And I need a much better word than that, but always affirm and say, I'm grateful that you're sharing that with me, or good for you, or, really affirm them and then dig deeper. Don't immediately try to negotiate with them or resist, because when you create this resistance, now you're negotiating with your own client. They need to feel that you're on their side and the two of you are coming alongside one another to make this decision. So I would always say, oh, wow, that's a fantastic number. Let's talk more about that. Right.
Good. Okay.
Really dig. So, and I've had this happen, Charlie. At the end of the day, you have to decide whether to list with someone who is wildly unrealistic, because you're saying it truly isn't going to sell for a penny over 350, which right now in my market, I couldn't say that.
Yeah, right.
But in your scenario, it really won't. Would you list it at 4? And I told you before we went on air, I actually had this happen. It was in a different market. They were clients of mine. I had sold their mother's home. They were certain that they wanted to go really, really high. I brought in an appraiser. I did my best. It was a very unique home. Comping it was challenging. And so I brought in an appraiser, and the appraiser came in slightly higher than me, but we're talking like a delta of like 80 grand, like we were way apart.
Yeah.
And they defied both of us and priced it super high and chased the market down for 8 months. And they got 35 less than I expected and 50 less than the appraiser expected, because they waited. Now, it was on them. It was their life. They were waiting for a job change, and they didn't blame anyone. But that was a situation where I took something overpriced and we were eyes wide open. It was a very honest conversation between us. So I would say, make sure you know your stuff.
Yep.
Bring in an appraiser if that would help you. In some cases, it won't. In the olden days, Charlie, what I used to do is I would take them on a tour of their active competition. That's not really appropriate in COVID to just go looking at comps. But I would get them in the car and say, oh, wow, that's a great number. Let's go compare to what the buyers will have to choose from. Right now in my market, Charlie, the inventory is so tight. It makes pricing a unique challenge. So I don't know how much you want to talk about the now versus the norm.
No. I mean, I think you bring up a good point. We're in a similar market, I think, in the DC metro area. High rises, I think, are having more of a challenge, downtown. We're seeing some price reductions in downtown DC high rises. These would have sold in a weekend 6 months ago, right? And they're sitting now. And I think it's because people are rethinking COVID and where they want to live. Well,
let's talk about those numbers, because I will tell you, I use those in every market analysis conversation, right? It's average days on market or the target property, right? In a more balanced market, your solds are everything, right? What are the sold comps? When markets are changing direction dramatically like they are now, average days on market is a valuable one. List to sell ratio at the time of contract is a valuable number. And I don't pull it for the county. I don't pull it for all of MLS. I pull it for the comps. For me, list to sell ratio is right around 100+%. Depending on the neighborhood. And that's a valuable thing, mostly to show to buyers.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
But days on market, I can say, here, let's look at 30 days. And I don't go far, guys. Right now, for me, comping, if I have to go 60 days to get enough data points, I might. But wow, you can't go too far back in the past before you're just looking at stuff that isn't true. It's not relevant.
Okay, good. What else do you include in the CMA?
So days on market, list to sell ratio. I don't do cost per square foot unless you're looking at an extremely, like you were talking about high rise. If every single unit is the same, maybe that's an interesting number. But I don't use cost per square foot, and I have to talk new agents out of doing that because that's a little bit treacherous. I'm scrambling to think. I should have bulleted these out before we went on the air. What are you thinking of as data points, Charlie, that you would also include?
I would just say we want to make sure that we include everything, right? And we want to make sure that we're taking a look at the tax records and see if anything is sold that's not part of the MLS, that was not included in the MLS. And I would encourage us to also make sure that we're looking at canceled, withdrawns, temporarily off. So I think it can be easy to forget about that stuff. And we don't want to forget about all of those properties. I think that that's important. Other than that, I think you and I are on the same page when it comes to the actual CMA, right? And there's some fluff here that should be in the pre-listing presentation, like you and I talked about a minute ago. But the actual CMA, I think that we're good. And you and I think, do it the exact same way. We've not done it in person, but I like to print out the comps. I don't use a CMA tool generally. I just print out the comps and I highlight and I circle and I star and I mark up. And then I literally go through it with the client, sheet by sheet. That's how I've found to do it. That's effective for me. And I have yet to find a decent way to do that online. And I like to, mark it up before I get to the house. Yeah. So I'm not, struggling to find a number or something. Yeah. But, I'm just going through, what they start at, what did they end up at, how long were they on the market? And, is there an anomaly, right? Or all of the units that we're looking at have a 1-car garage, but this one had a 2-car garage, right? Or two parking spaces in the garage instead of 1. Yep. So, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So the other thing that's on here is property adjustments. I strongly discourage agents from doing that. You just probably don't have the skill. And I think you could really, really skew it. My first business partner in my career way back in the day was an analytical, and he had a spreadsheet that had adjustments for everything you could possibly imagine, and he was really good at it. And in 3 hours, he would have the most perfect CMA you could imagine. And me being the buyer's agent on the team, I knew that market like my heartbeat. And I would go through the comps, and in 30 minutes, he and I would come to the same number because I'm not an analytical. But most people don't have that skill. I think if you're doing plus or minus $3,000 on a fireplace, you're going to trip yourself up. Yep. So I would not use that unless you have mad skills and you also have experience as an appraiser. The other thing is you just really, Charlie, I think you made a great point about do everything, bring everything. I would create a standard, which is, yes, the tax records and every possible thing, and have it all available, and then gauge your audience. Yep. Prepared to deliver the Cliff Notes version of the statistics for the listener, depending on their tolerance. Right. And if you have a very analytical seller, be prepared to give them everything. And if you don't, because you really might wear them out. Years ago, I had a client, an elderly lady, that I had done a lot for. I had even helped her paint her house, like physically with my hands. And I really thought I had this listing in the bag. And she mentioned that she had interviewed with somebody who was the big guns in my market at the time. She mentioned the name, and I'm like, oh. She said, do you want to see her listing presentation? And I was like, yeah. She gave it to me. She gave me this woman's listing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so lucky. It was pulp. It was this many pages with that plastic scrunchy binding of like everything that you could possibly find in the public record. It impressed this woman. She said, this is better than yours. Mine was thinner. Mine was marketing focused. Mine was very visually driven. What I didn't know back in the day, I had no understanding of personality types, was this elderly woman was very bright and very analytical. This level of granularity impressed her as thorough and professional. So I would say always be prepared with all the things. Yes. And prepared to set it aside or simply just give it to them and not go through it if they are not an analytical, because it might be too much. What about you, Charlie? What is the limit of what you would provide?
I bring what I think I need to educate the seller. I don't have a certain amount. I went on an appointment a few weeks ago, and I went back 6 months because it was just for one building, right? And we had the discussion. This was before COVID, and it was very interesting because you could see the line right when COVID hit, right? The days on market went way up, like from less than a week to 3 weeks. And it was like right that April timeframe. It was so interesting bringing that to them, and they knew that they had a problem, right? This unit's sitting vacant. They moved out. There was an anomaly with it as well. It was a two garage spaces in the building garage. Almost every other unit in the building has one. How do you price for that? Right. Well, I paid the developer $40,000 for that space. Well, no one's going to pay an extra $40,000 for that space now. Right. So Charlie, I don't have a hard and fast rule. I think I look through and I see what I think is best, and that's what I print and mark up, and off we go.
Yeah, and I know we're at time. We gotta wrap up. But I think you've brought up something super, super valuable when you said you went back 6 months. When I say I go back 30 or 60 days, I mean in what I'm going to hang my hat on.
Yep.
You need to go back as far as you need to go back to understand.
Right. Absolutely.
You have to know more than your client.
Yep.
You can't be the one who didn't know this or this or this about the neighborhood, the trends, the builder, whatever. Yeah, do your due diligence on the neighborhood. We have provided, I think, at least to RE/MAX Allegiance agents, you have access to the market study that I shared, and it's just a little bit granular vision of a neighborhood or a subdivision. You walk in with that done, it just really does help you to understand your product.
Awesome. Let's leave it there. On Friday, I have a special guest. Kevin Bailey is going to be joining me. He is the DC attorney for Community Title Network. Amy, you and I will be back on Monday. Good to see you. Have a good weekend. Eyerusalem, let's throw it back to you.
Thank you so much for watching. And as always, we're here to make your real estate career better.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.